All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating 1984 address by Reverend Sun Myung Moon. We are going to treat this speech entirely as a historical artifact, impartially breaking down his highly unique intersection of Cold War geopolitics and theology. Whether you agree with his premises or not, examining the actual architecture of his argument gives us this incredibly captivating window into how some religious leaders were trying to navigate and ultimately solve the sheer existential dread of the 1980s.
To help us digest this, we'll be following his six-part framework. We'll look at a world in conflict, the ideological divide, the human fall, the power of invincible love, America's crucial global role, and finally, a pruned Christian orchard.
Starting right off with part 1, a world in conflict. To really grasp the vibe of the era, just look at this quote. It brilliantly captures the visceral, everyday fear of the time, and it frames Moon's core argument perfectly. Humanity was locked into a doomed, blood-soaked trajectory. He notes that human history has literally been sown in blood and war, so without some kind of fundamental shift, we could only expect more of the same. It's a pretty bleak starting point for sure, but it's absolutely essential to understand the urgency behind his message.
So Moon sets the geopolitical stage with this stark comparison. Looking impartially at his words, he warns that the democratic world essentially lacked a clear direction. On the flip side, he saw the communist world as unified, powerful, and pushing incredibly hard for global dominion. His grim takeaway? The side that's putting the most effort into conquering the world is the one poised to win, making 1984 a profoundly dangerous age.
Moving right along to part 2, the ideological divide.
This is where things get really interesting, because Moon pivots to philosophically deconstruct Karl Marx. He points out that Marxism operates on an atheistic, completely material worldview. It basically assumes that external conflict is the necessary engine for all progress. Religion, on the other hand, acknowledges an omnipotent God, looks for the internal root of our struggles, and focuses heavily on the well-being of a whole. Moon argues here that an external focus naturally promotes division, whereas an internal religious focus promotes unification.
And he uses that exact framework to pose what I think is a pretty devastating logical question to the communist ideology. If dialectical materialism says progress only results from struggle, what actually happens when a communist utopia is achieved? Well, according to Moon's reading of their own theory, a peaceful communist world is an absolute impossibility. To keep progressing, they would eventually just have to start fighting among themselves.
Which brings us to part 3, the human fall.
Now, Moon completely anticipates the natural skepticism of his audience here. He knows people look at a world totally ravaged by corruption and war, and they naturally start to doubt God's existence. So, he asks the ultimate question directly. If an omnipotent God is real, why is there so much evil and division in the world?
His answer boils down to something he terms the human fall. According to the speech, this specific theological concept is the true underlying root cause of all geopolitical and social division. It's the idea that very early in our history, humanity and God basically became enemies. Our internal harmony was destroyed, leaving humanity with nothing but external struggle. So every national boundary stained by blood, every single war, it all stems back to this original separation.
All right, part 4, the power of invincible love.
So if the human fall is ultimately a spiritual problem, a political treaty isn't going to fix it, right? Moon proposes a purely spiritual formula, which is perfectly captured in this quote. He points to figures like Jesus Christ, who wielded a very specific wall-breaking power, invincible love. We're not just talking about loving your neighbor here. It is the absolute, logic-defying act of loving your actual enemy. Moon argues this is literally the only power capable of melting down entrenched walls of hatred.
And this requires a reversal on an unprecedented scale. We aren't talking about a slight course correction. Moon argues that because human history started from a place of lies and hatred, we have to execute a literal 180-degree turn. We have to restart history from the ground up, using truth and absolute love as the foundation.
He doesn't just leave this as some abstract theory either. Moon uses these two historical pairings to show how this applies practically. First, he cites Jesus, representing a conquered Israel, using love to ultimately culturally conquer the occupying Roman Empire. Then he brings it right into the modern day, pointing to his own movement where Japanese and Korean individuals, who are historically fierce national enemies, were actually uniting and even marrying. For Moon, this was tangible proof that invincible love could melt real-world geopolitical hatred.
Let's look at part 5, America's crucial global role.
Here, he zeroes in on the United States and critiques its typical approach to the world. He contrasts two totally distinct models, treating foreign aid as a conditional investment that requires a return versus acting with unconditional parental love. He criticizes America for keeping its technology secret or always expecting something back. Instead, he pushes for the latter approach, giving wealth freely to help others and, just like a parent would, completely forgetting about the debt.
The address issues a stark warning, along with a massive call to action. 4 billion people were waiting. Moon asserted that America was vitally important to God's plan, but only if it went out to the 6 continents and 5 races, offering its wealth unconditionally. If America decided to selfishly hoard its prosperity, he warned, it would inevitably fall from its incredibly fortunate global position.
And finally, Part 6, a pruned Christian orchard.
To actually enact this massive global shift, Moon asserts that traditional Christianity has lost its original spirit. Despite constantly preaching love, he says it was failing to actually practice loving its enemies, even fighting amongst its own different denominations. Because of this, he uses the metaphor of an orchard. He says God, as the owner, has to enact a severe pruning process. He needs to cut away the sick, ineffective branches to make room for a healthy, new religious movement.
So, what exactly would that new movement need to look like? Well, it must be able to overcome 4 massive burdens: conflict among nations, division among denominations, racial conflict, and conflict between world religions. Moon specifically notes that communist strategies in the future would actively try to exploit these exact divisions, especially between races and religions, to further their own goals if a new movement didn't solve them first.
To combat all of this, Moon offers a step-by-step formula to turn our egocentric reality completely upside down. It's a total inversion of selfishness. Think about it. The individual lives for the family lives for the nation lives for the world, and the world lives for God. It is a systematic, profound reversal of the current direction of human history. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're leaving you with this final, provocative thought. Moon's 1984 address absolutely does not offer easy political fixes. It demands a total transformation of the human heart. It asks a deeply uncomfortable question. If true peace actually requires a 180-degree turn away from all our selfish instincts, are any of us truly ready to embrace the radical, exhausting formula of loving our enemies? It's a question that hits just as hard today as it did decades ago.